Okay, where are we? There we go. I hope everybody is still here. It's always hard to tell. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you may happen to be. I am here right now. It's about a minute after 7. It is California. And good to see you. Before I start, I'm going to explain something to you. No, that is not a little. Whoops. That is not a little ketchup spot on your monitor, no matter how messy an eater you may be when you're sitting at your computer. No, in fact, it's a hole, a small but perfectly formed and rather attractive hole in my forehead. And here, I'll show you the whole thing. You can see it's mostly gone now. It was much better earlier. And it's one of those things that it's just not even worth explaining, but I'll explain it anyway. Somehow, when I was lying down, earbuds in, thinking about book stuff this morning, I was getting up or was, in the process of unraveling myself from blankets and duvets and things like that. And I didn't realize that I had the cord of my earbuds wrapped around the corner of the duvet. So when I threw the corner of the duvet back, instead of yanking the cord of the earbuds out of my phone, it actually shot my phone at my face like a trebuchet or something. Actually, that's probably not the right sort of Archimedean engine, but I yanked on the cord and it came flying at me and clocked me. Fortunately, I was not wearing glasses, although so it probably did more damage than it would have, but on the other hand, at least it didn't break any of my glasses. So anyway, that's why I have a hole in my forehead. I could have covered it up, but I figured I'd rather remind all of you what an idiot I am, because I'm much more comfortable with that than pretending that I'm not. And it was one of those things where you just lie there for a half a second, like kind of stunned, going, did I just do something really, really stupid? I did, didn't I? And I was like, kind of rubbing it and going, oh, that hurt. Ooh, I could feel a little bump there, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I got up a few minutes later and it was actually bleeding down the sides of my nose. But no big deal, honestly. I just thought I'd explain it in case people were saying, why does he have that? Like, is it Diwali? Is he celebrating some Hindu holiday? And no, I wouldn't have the hubris to try and celebrate somebody else's holiday. No, that's just a hole I made in my head with my own phone. Anyway, good to see you all. I'm going to be reading tonight. I'll be very surprised if we get past this section, which is almost all Paul Jonas in Otherland, Volume 1, City of Golden Shadows. And but before I do, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I needed to bring you guys up to date on. I was saying during the reading slot last night that I'm just working. I'm working on Navigator's Children. We are working at staying out of the pandemic as much as possible, obviously. I am getting occasionally a little bored and cabin fevery, but, no complaints. I'm better equipped to deal with that stuff than most people. The dogs, I think, want to get out more often, so that's something that I can remedy, and it will probably be good for me too. And I got my booster, so we only have one unboosted person in the household, which is predictably our eldest child. Predictably because it takes him quite a while to get around to anything, and I think I'm just going to have to literally sit him down and make him make the appointment. It's not that he doesn't want to get it, it's just that he keeps going, yeah, I got to do that, and then nothing. You parents of teenagers, even though he's past teenage now, you parents of teenagers will know exactly what I'm talking about. If any of you, well, no, I don't think any of you are, but if any of you are teenagers, maybe you could explain to the rest of us this fascinating time sense that I only dimly remember, where like now is eternal and things that have to be planned are like, yeah, someday you'll think about planning them, and then some other day you might actually plan them, and then in some inconceivably vast and distant future you might actually do them. I think mortality, the creeping step of mortality begins to get to us starting in middle age, and we begin to think like, I really need to do it now. I need to do everything now because there is no forever. There is no eternal timeless time in which everything will happen that you want to have happen. No, you have to make things happen. So anyway, anything else? Brain. No, just as I said, just working. There are various other things bubbling under that when or if they ever become real things, I will be happy to tell everybody about, but nothing that is worth talking about right at the moment, or even, worth thinking about all that much because anybody who does what I do and has had a reasonable amount of success knows there's always nibbling going on. People are always going like, "Oh, well, I know somebody who knows somebody who really likes your work, and they sort of know somebody else who does this," and there's all these kind of things. And as I often say, I use the George Harrison Taxman mathematics. And that George wrote that song, that Beatles song, as a protest against the tax strategies for the upper level wage earners in England in the mid 60s, where he would say, as he says in the song, "There's one for you, 19 for me." Now that's a complaint about being taxed to 95% of your profits. My one for you, 19 for me is more of a belief that really for every one thing that actually turns into something, outside of the normal fact of just working on, your books or whatever. But in terms of other projects or things or whatever, that's pretty much the ratio. It's like out of 20 chances that people say, "Oh, this could be this, and so and so wants to talk to you right now," and blah blah blah, and then it's like 1 out of 20 of those things ever turns into anything at all. And even there, they don't always continue to be something. I've had many other things that have gotten quite close and then just fallen apart at the last moment. So I am a big believer in not only not counting chickens before they're hatched, but I try not to even look at the damn chickens. You know what I mean? I'm like, or I guess the proper use of the metaphor there would be the eggs. I don't even look at the eggs. Somebody's trying to tell me, "Tab, there's a bunch of eggs." I'm like, tell me when the damn chickens hatch. Tell me when the chickens are actually walking around going cheep, cheep, cheep and looking to be fed. Then we'll have a conversation. But I don't want to hear about your eggs, and I'm not going to count them. Anyway, long disquisition there, and none of it important except to say, not a lot to report this week, just working. And, yeah, working, cleaning up after muddy dog prints, because since the rain has stopped, but the pathways that our large dog still uses are very muddy. He doesn't go out very much when it's raining, but when it stopped raining, he's perfectly happy to go out, even though he comes back in with these little mud galoshes on, and then proceeds to walk around all over the house, leaving these quite, I almost said charming, only in that they're so lovely looking. They just look like you can follow this dog everywhere he's been. But of course you have to clean them up. Anyway, so that's what we're doing this week. I'm working, Deb's working on her fabric art stuff. Kids are working on various school and life related things. I'm doing okay. And I hope you are too. Anyway, so without further ado, without further ado, but I always get confused now because there's a pun in Shakespeare where he refers to it's the mercy, the quality of mercy is not strained, and where the last bit of the line is, it melts, thaws, and resolves itself into a dew, meaning obviously, there's this whole water metaphor. And it melts and thaws and then resolves itself into dew, D-E-W. But of course, resolves itself into adieu. Adieu means to God, and it also means goodbye. So it's a pun on death, which is a wonderful thing that Shakespeare did. But it also means a lot of times they say adieu as if I'm explaining that pun, and then I say adieu, and that's not what the word is. So apologies. And apologies also for this, which is much ado about nothing. Anyway, okay, so last we spoke, well, not we, but the last time I read, we had started the chapter where Paul had come through it was his escape from the First World War thing that was happening and that he didn't understand, but that he was clearly trapped in. He didn't kind of remember anything except the fact that he had been in this trench on the Western Front in the First World War, like forever. And finally, through a process of being nudged continually by strange outside or seemingly outside forces, he got up and ran away from the battlefield and discovered himself in this kind of netherland, and then found a glowing passage, chased by Finch and Mullet, big fat man, small skinny man, who had pretended, or who had apparently been masquerading as his friends, but now came to get him and drag him back, and he escaped through into another place. And we started this chapter which by the way is chapter 12, looking through the glass, with him kind of coming back to a semblance of consciousness somewhere new, and it turned out to be a forest. He couldn't remember who he was, what his name was, anything. He's wandering through this forest following a green bird, which of course ties back to the feather that had helped him to get out of the First World War in the first place. Meets a guy with strangely yellow eyes who calls himself Jack Woodling, Jack of the Woods, and that guy sends him on to an inn. And at the inn, he meets two significant people. One he hasn't really met yet, but is a boy who is tending the spit by the fire. And the other is the owner of the establishment, a woman who calls herself... What does she call herself? I'm trying to remember. Woodling refers to her as her ladyship, and she confesses later on that she is the former monarch, or at least the former master or mistress of this land, but that she is no longer in charge, and that these soldiers in red who are dining and drinking in her tavern are minions of her enemy, who is another female, from what we gather. Anyway, but she talks to Paul, finds out that Paul is a friend of Jack Woodling, or at least is somebody that Jack Woodling trusted, and she agrees to put him up for the night in the stable because they have no room. So that's where we were. And she has just, the landlady has just gone off and left him, and he's going to be sleeping in the stables. And that's where we are. So I hope I've kind of brought some of that back for those who don't remember the story or who haven't heard it for a long time. A caged bird, a tall tree, a house with many rooms, a loud voice shouting, bellowing, crashing down on him like thunder. Paul came up from the dream like a drowning man, surfacing to the smell of damp hay and the noises of fretful horses. He sat up, trying to shake off the disorientation of sleep. The stable door was partway open, a shadow, showing lightless against the slice of starry night. "Who's there?" He fumbled for a weapon, an urging of some sunken memory, but came up with nothing but a handful of straw. "Quiet!" The whisperer was as nervous as Paul's stablemates. "It's only me, Gally." The shadow came closer. Paul could see that it was someone quite small. "The pot boy." "What do you want?" "Not to rob you, governor." He sounded aggrieved. I'd have come in quieter than that were the case. I come to warn you." Paul could see the boy's eyes now, gleaming like mother of pearl. "Warn me?" "Those soldiers, they've been drinking too much, and now they're talking of coming for you. I don't know why." "The bastards." Paul climbed to his feet. "Did the lady send you?" "No. Locked herself in a room for the night, she has. I heard 'em talking." He straightened up now as Paul moved toward the door. "Where are you going to?" "I don't know." Back to the forest, I suppose. He cursed quietly. At least he had no possessions to slow his flight. Come on with me, then. I'll take you to a place. King's men won't follow you there, not after dark. Paul paused, one hand on the door. There was indeed a soft clatter coming from the front of the inn, across the courtyard, a noise very much like drunken men trying to move stealthily. Why? He whispered. Help you? Why not? The boy grabbed his arm. None of us much like them redbreasts. We don't like their mistress, neither. Follow me. Not waiting for Paul to reply, the boy slipped out the door and moved rapidly but quietly along the wall. Paul pulled the door closed and hurried after him. Gally led him around the back of the stable, then stopped and touched a hand to Paul's arm in warning before leading him down a narrow stone stairway. The only light came from the half moon. Paul nearly stepped off the stairs into the river before Gally took his arm again. Boat, the boy whispered and guided Paul into a gently rocking shadow. When he was seated in the boat's damp bottom, his rescuer carefully lifted up a pole that had been lying on the tiny dock and pushed the little craft out onto the dark river. From above them came the sudden gleam of an unhooded lantern and a clatter as the stable door was flung open. Paul held his breath until the noise of the soldiers' drunken disappointment faded behind them. The trees on the near bank slid silently past. Won't you get into trouble? Paul asked. Won't they blame you when they see you've gone? The lady'll speak up for me. The boy leaned forward as if looking for some landmark in what to Paul was impenetrable night. Besides, they were so knob-knocked with drink, they didn't know where I got to anyway. I can just say I went to sleep in the washing hamper to get away from their noise. Well, I'm grateful. Where are you taking me? To my place. Well, it's not just mine. We all live there. Paul settled back. Now that his sudden rousing and narrow escape were behind him, he was almost enjoying the quiet of the night, the feeling of gliding along beneath another larger river of sky. There was peace here and companionship of a sort. And who are we all? He asked at last. Oh, my mates, Gally answered with a hint of pride. The Oyster House boys. We're the White King's men, every one of us. They tied up the boat at a wide pier that jutted far out into the river. The place where the pier touched the shore and the narrow stairs leading upward were lit by a single lantern, which swayed gently in the quickening wind. Paul looked up to the shadowy bulk on the headlands. You live there? Do now. It was empty for a while. Agile as a squirrel, Gally scrambled out of the boat and onto the pier. He reached down and pulled up a sack that Paul had not noticed. After he had set it down, he reached back a helping hand. All the boats stopped here once on a time, men singing, bringing in the nets. Paul followed him up the hillside. The stairwell had been cut into the solid rock, and the steps were narrow and slippery with night dew. Paul found he could only climb safely by turning sideways, putting the length of his foot along each step. He looked down. The lantern was burning far below. The boat had drifted under the pier. Don't be so slow, Gally whispered. We got to get you inside. Few folk come down round here, but if our soldiers are a-hunting for you, we don't want no one seeing you. Paul leaned in toward the hill, steadying himself against the steps above him, and made his way up as quickly as he could. Despite being burdened with a sack, the boy kept bouncing back down to urge him on. At last, they reached the top. There was no lantern here, and Paul could see nothing of the building except a deeper darkness spread wide against the stars. Gally clutched his sleeve and led him forward. After a while, Paul felt boards creaking beneath his feet. Gally stopped and knocked on what was unmistakably a door. A few moments later, an apparition appeared at the height of Paul's knees, a gleaming sideways rectangular face. Who's there? The voice was almost a squeak. Gally, I brought company. Can't let you in without a password. Password? Galley hissed his disgust. There wasn't no password when I left this morning. Open it up. But how do I know it's you? The face, which Paul could now see was peering through a slot in the door, scowled in a laughable attempt at officiousness. Are you mad? Let us in, Pointer, or I'll reach through and knuckle your pate. You'll recognize that right enough. The slot clapped closed. Then a moment later the door opened. A faint, fishy scent wafted out. Galley picked up his sack again and slid through. Paul followed. Pointer, a small, pale boy, took a few steps backwards, staring at the new arrival. Who's he? He's with me. He's going to spend the night here. What's this diddle about password? That was Miyagi's idea. Some strange folk been coming round today. And how was I supposed to know the password when I wasn't here? Galley reached out and rubbed savagely at Pointer's unkempt hair, then pushed him ahead of them down the dark hallway. They followed the small boy into a wide, high-ceilinged room as large as a church hall. It was lit by only a few candles, so there were more dark places than light ones. But as far as Paul could see, it was empty but for the clinging odor of dampness and river mud. All's well, Pointer sang out. It's Galley. He's brought someone with him. Dark shapes emerged from the shadows, first 2 or 3, then many, like fairy folk appearing from their woodland hiding places. Within moments, some 3 dozen children had crowded around Paul and his guide, staring solemnly, many wiping eyes still puffy from sleep. None were older than Galley. Most were a great deal younger. There were a few girls, but the greatest number were boys, and all of them were dirty and starveling thin. Miyagi, why is there a password, and don't you think you might have told me? A small round boy stepped forward. It weren't meant to keep you out, Galley. There were some folk nosing around today we hadn't seen before. I made the little ones keep quiet, and I told 'em all not to let anyone in who didn't say custard. Several of the smaller children repeated the word, the excitement of a secret, or possibly a dim memory of the thing itself, clear in the hushed thrill of their voices. Right, said Galley. Well, I'm here now, and this is my friend. He frowned, rubbing the soot on his forehead. What's your name, Governor? Paul told him. Right, my friend Paul, and he's for the White King, too, so there's nothing to be afraid of. You lot over there get more wood on the fire. It's cold as a brass monkey in here. M'lady sent some cheese and bread. He dropped his sack on the floor. You'll never learn all the names. Miyagi and Pointer you met. Chesapeake's over there, fallen back asleep already, the lazy lummox. That's Blue, she's Pointer's sister. And that's my brother, and that's my brother, Bay. The last named, a skinny, snub-nosed child with curling red hair, pulled a horrible face. Galley aimed a mock kick in his direction. Paul watched the Oyster House boys and girls scatter in various directions as Galley, a natural general, set them each tasks. When they were alone again, Paul turned to his guide and asked quietly, What did you mean I'm for the White King? I don't know anything about this. I'm a stranger here. That's as may be, said Galley, grinning. But since you ran away from the Red Lady's soldiers, I don't think you'll be wearing her token, will you? Paul shook his head. I don't know anything about that. I don't even know how I came to this town, this country. A man found me in the woods and sent me to the inn. A fellow with strange eyes, named Jack. But I don't know anything about kings or queens. Jack sent you, and you must have more to say than you're letting on. Did you fight with him in the war? Paul shook his head again, helplessly. I fought in a war, but it wasn't here. I don't remember anymore. He slumped down onto the wooden floor and put his back against the wall. The excitement had worn off, and he was exhausted. He had only managed a few hours' sleep before Galley had woken him. Well, never you mind, governor. We'll sort you out. Galley handed out the bread and cheese, but Paul had eaten earlier, and although he was hungry again, he did not want to reduce the children's small portions any further. They looked so small and poorly nourished that he found it painful to watch them eat. Even so, they were remarkably well-behaved urchins, each waiting his or her turn for a mouthful of crust. Afterward, with the fire blazing and the room warm at last, Paul was ready to go back to sleep, but the children were too excited by the night's events to return to bed. "A song!" cried someone, and others took up the cry. "Yes, a song! Have the man sing a song!" Paul shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't remember any. I wish I did." "No need to worry," Galley said. "Blue, you sing one. She's got a best voice, even though she's not the loudest," he explained. The little girl stood up. Her dark hair hung in tangled knots around her shoulders, confined only by a band of soiled white cloth around her forehead. She frowned and sucked her finger. "What song?" "The one about where we come from." Galley seated himself cross-legged beside Paul, like a desert prince commanding entertainment for a foreign dignitary. Blue nodded thoughtfully, took her finger from her mouth, and began to sing in a high, sweet, and slightly wavering voice. "The ocean dark, the ocean wide, and we cross from the other side. The ocean dark, the ocean deep, between us and the land of sleep. Away, 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 sing oh. They called for us, but we had gone. Away, 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 sing oh. Across the sea we had to go." Huddled with his small tribe, listening to Blue's voice float up like the sparks from the fire, Paul suddenly felt his own loneliness surrounding him like a cloud. Perhaps he could stay in this place. He could be a kind of father, make sure these children did not hunger, did not need to fear the world outside their old house. "The night was cold, the night was long, and we had no light but our song. The night was black, the night was deep, between us and the land of sleep." There was a sadness in it that Paul could feel, some note of mourning that sounded beneath the melody. It was as though he listened to the keening of a baby bird which had fallen from its nest, calling across the hopeless distance to the warmth and safety it had forever lost. "We crossed the sea, we crossed the night, and now we search the world for light to love us, light to keep the memories of the land of sleep. Away, 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 sing oh. They called for us, but we had gone. Away, 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 sing oh. Across the sea we had to go." The song went on, and Paul's eyes began to sag closed. He fell asleep to the sound of Blue's small voice chiming against the night. A bird was beating its wings against a window pane, wingtips pattering against the glass in frantic repetition. Trapped! It was trapped! The tiny body, shimmering with green and purple, beat helplessly against the pane, rustling and thumping like a failing heart. Somebody must set it free, Paul knew, or it would die. The colors, the beautiful colors, would turn to ashy gray and then vanish, taking a piece of sun out of the world forever. He woke up with a start. Galley was kneeling over him. "Quiet," the boy whispered. "There's someone outside. Might be the soldiers." As Paul sat up, knocking came again, a dry sound that murmured through the vast oyster house. Perhaps, Paul thought, still tangled in the rags of his dream, It's not soldiers at all. Perhaps it's only a dying bird. Get up there! Galley pointed to a rickety staircase leading up to one of the galleries. Hide! We won't tell them you're here, whoever it is. Paul mounted the squeaking stairs, which swayed alarmingly. Clearly, it had been a long time since anyone so heavy had climbed them. The furtive knocking sounded again. Galley watched until Paul had reached the shadowy upper reaches, then took a smoldering stick from the fire and crept toward the doorway. A thin blue light seeped in through the wide fanlight over his head. Dawn was approaching. Who's out there? Who's out there? There was a pause, as though whoever knocked had not truly expected an answer. The voice, when it came, was smooth and almost childishly sweet, but it raised the hairs on the back of Paul's neck. Just honest men. We are looking for a friend of ours. We don't know you. Galley was fighting to keep his voice steady. Stands to reason there's no one here calls himself your friend. Ah, but perhaps you've seen him, this friend of ours. Who are you, knocking on doors at such an hour? Just travellers. Have you seen our friend? He was a soldier once, but he has been wounded. He's not right in the head. Not right at all. It would be cruel to hide him from us. We are his friends and could help him. The voice was full of kind reason, but something else moved behind the words. Something greedy. A blind fear gripped Paul. He wanted to scream at whatever stood outside, to go away and leave him in peace. He put his knuckle between his teeth instead and bit down hard. We've seen nobody. We're eyeing nobody. Galley tried to make his voice deep and scornful, with only middling success. This is our place now. We are working men who must have our sleep, so be off before we set our dogs on you. There was a murmuring sound from behind the door, a grumble of quiet conversation. The door creaked in its frame, then creaked again, as though someone had for a moment set a heavy weight against it. Struggling against his terror, Paul began to creep around the upper gallery toward the door so he could be close enough to help Galley if trouble began. Very well, the voice said at last. We are truly sorry if we have disturbed you. We will go now. Sadly, we must seek our friend in another town if he is not here. There was another creak, and the latch rattled in its socket. The invisible stranger continued calmly, as though the rattling were something quite unconnected. If you should happen to meet such a man, a soldier, perhaps a trifle confused or strange, tell him to ask after us in the King's Dream or in other inns along the river. Joiner and Tusk, those are our names. We so badly want to help our friend. Heavy boots scraped on the doorstep. Then there was a long silence. Galley reached up to open the door, but Paul leaned over the railing and signaled him not to touch it. Instead, he moved to where the gallery rail stood closest to the fanlight above the door and leaned out. Two shapes stood on the doorstep, both bundled in dark cloaks. One was larger, but otherwise they were little more than lumps of shadow in the gray before morning. Paul felt his heart speed even faster. He gestured frantically at Galley not to move. By the thin light, he could see some of the children were awake and peering out of various sleeping places around the oyster house, their eyes wide with fear. The smaller of the two shapes cocked its head to one side as though listening. Paul did not know why, but he was desperate that these people, whoever they were, should not find him. He thought his heart must be pounding as loud as a kettle drum. An image came bubbling up through his panicked thoughts, a picture of an empty place, a vast expanse of nothingness in which only he existed, he and two things that hunted him. The smaller figure leaned close to the larger, as though whispering. Then they both turned and made their way down the path and vanished in the fog that was drifting up from the river.
Two of them, eh? Are those the strange folk you say you saw?
Miyagi nodded vigorously. Gally screwed up his forehead in an awesome display of concentration.
I can't say as I've ever heard of such before, he said at last, but there's plenty of strange folk coming through these days. He grinned at Paul. No offence, but if they're not soldiers, they're spies or something like. They'll be coming back, I reckon.
Paul thought the boy was probably right.
Then there's only one thing to do. I'll go. Then they'll have to follow me.
He said it briskly, but the idea of having to move on so soon made him ache. He had been foolish to imagine that he might find peace so easily. He could remember very little, but he knew it had been a long time since he had been somewhere he could call his home. What's the best way out of this town? As a matter of fact, what's beyond this town? I have no idea.
It's not so easy to travel through the squared, said Gally. Things have changed since we came here, and if you just set out, chances are you'll walk right into the Red Lady's soldiers, and then it'll be the dungeons for you, or something worse.
He shook his head gravely and sucked his lip, pondering.
No, we'll need to ask someone who knows about things. I reckon we should take you to Bishop Humphrey.
Who's that?
Take him to old Dumpy. Little Miyagi seemed amused. That great bag of wind. He knows things. He'll know where the governor here should go.
Gally turned to Paul as though asking him to settle an argument.
The bishop's a smart man. Knows the names of everything, even things you didn't think had names. What you say?
If we can trust him.
Gally nodded. He's a bag of wind, it's true, but he's an important man, so the redbreasts leave him alone.
He clapped his hands for attention. The children gathered around him.
I'm taking my friend to see the bishop. While I'm gone, I don't want you lot going out, and I certainly don't want you letting no one in. The password idea's a good one. Don't open the door to anyone, even me, lest they say the word custard. Got it? Custard. Miyagi, you're in charge. And Bay, wipe that grin off your fazoot. Try not to be an Egypt just this once, will you?
Gally led him out the back door, which opened onto the headlands and a pine forest that grew almost to the very walls of the oyster house. The boy checked carefully, then waved for Paul to follow him into the trees. Within moments, they were tramping through a wood so dense that they could no longer see the large building just a few dozen yards behind them. The morning fog was still thick and lay close to the ground. The woods were unnaturally silent, except for the sound of his own feet crunching across the carpet of fallen needles. The boy made almost no noise at all. Paul could hear nothing. No wind rattled the branches. No birds saluted the climbing sun. As they made their way beneath the trees, with the mist swirling about their ankles, Paul could almost imagine that he was walking across clouds, hiking through the sky. The idea cast a shadow of memory, but whatever it was would not allow itself to be grasped and examined. They had walked for what seemed at least an hour, the slope slanting downward more often than not, when Gally, who was several paces ahead, waved Paul to a halt. The boy silenced any questions by lifting his small hand, then light-footed his way back to Paul's side.
Crossroads lies just ahead, he whispered, but I thought I heard something.
They made their way down the hillside until the land flattened and they could see a cleared split place between the trees with a strip of reddish dirt road at its center. Gally led them alongside it with great caution, as though they paced the length of a sleeping snake. Abruptly, he sank to his knees, then reached up to pull Paul down, too.
They had reached the place where a second dusty road cut across the path of the first. Two signposts that Paul could not read pointed away in the same direction down the crossroad. Galley crawled forward until he could watch the spot from behind a bush, not 50 paces from the intersection. They waited in silence so long that Paul was just about to stand up and stretch when he heard a noise. It was faint at first, faint and regular as a heartbeat, but it slowly grew louder. Footsteps. Two shapes appeared out of the misty trees, coming toward them from the direction the two signs were pointing. The pair walked in an unhurried way, their cloaks dragging in the dew-sodden dust of the road. One of them was very large and moved with an odd shuffle, but both were familiar from the front porch the night before. Paul felt his gorge rise. For a moment he feared he would not be able to breathe. The figures reached the center of the crossroad and paused for a moment in some silent communion before continuing in the direction from which Paul and Galley had come. The mist eddied around their feet. They wore shapeless hats as well as the sagging cloaks, but still Paul could see the glint of spectacles on the smaller. The larger had a peculiar grayish cast to his skin and appeared to be holding something in his mouth, for the jutting shapes that bulged his upper lip and pressed against his jaw were surely far too large to be teeth. Paul clutched hard at the mat of needles, digging furrows in the ground with his fingers. He felt light-headed, almost feverish, but he knew that death was hunting for him on that road. No, something worse than death, something far more empty, grim, and limitless than death. As if they sensed his thoughts, the two figures suddenly stopped in the center of the road, directly opposite the hiding place. Paul's pulse, already painfully fast, now rattled in his temples. The smaller figure bent down and craned its head forward, as though it had somehow become a different kind of creature, something more likely to go on 4 legs than 2. It pivoted its head slowly. Paul saw the lenses spark, spark, spark as they caught light through the shadowing trees. The moment seemed to stretch endlessly. The larger figure dropped a flat, grayish hand onto its companion's shoulder and rumbled something. In his panic, Paul could only hear words that sounded like sealing wax, then set off down the road, waddling so slowly its legs might have been tied together at the ankles. A moment later, the smaller straightened up and followed, shoulders up and head thrust forward in a sullen slouch. Paul did not release the breath burning in his chest until the two shapes had vanished into the mist, and even then he lay unmoving for some time. Galley did not seem in a hurry to rise either. "Going back to town, they are," the boy said quietly. "That's as well. Plenty to keep them busy there. All the same, I think we'll stay off the road." He scrambled to his feet. Paul got up and staggered after him, feeling as though he had almost fallen from some high place. A short time later, Galley cut across the road and led them down a smaller side road, which wound through the trees and up a small rise. At the top of the hill, rising from a copse of birch trees, stood a very small castle, whose central keep At the top of the hill, rising from a copse of birch trees, stood a very small castle, whose central keep jutted like a pointed hat. The drawbridge was down. The front door, no larger than the door on an ordinary house, stood open. They found the bishop sitting in the front room, surrounded by shelves of books and curios, reading a thin volume in the light that streamed in through the entrance. He fit his wide chair so snugly it was hard to imagine that he ever left it. He was huge and bald, with a protuberant lower lip and a mouth so wide that Paul felt sure he must have a greater than ordinary number of bones in his jaw. He looked up as their footfalls sounded against the polished stone floor. In the middle of my poetry hour, my all too brief moment for restful contemplation, still and all, he folded the book closed and let it slide down to the place where the hemisphere of his belly met his small legs. There was nothing flat enough in that area to be called a lap. Ah, the scullion lad, I see. Galley, is it not? Tender of the cook fire? What brings you here, pot urchin? Has one of your spitted carcasses suddenly called out for shriving? The fiery pit has a way of engendering such second thoughts. It took a moment before Paul realized that the hollow drum-like sound was actually a laugh. I've come asking your help, Bishop Humphrey, true enough. Galley grabbed Paul's sleeve and tugged him forward. This gentleman needs some advice, and I told him, ask Bishop Humphrey. He's the cleverest man in these parts. And here we are. Indeed. The bishop turned his tiny eyes to Paul, then after an instant's shrewd examination let them slide away again. He never kept his gaze on anything for very long, which gave his conversation an air of distracted irritation. A stranger, eh? A recent immigrant to our humble shire? Or perhaps you are a visitor of a more transient nature, passing through, as it were, a peregrine. Paul hesitated. Despite Galley's assurances, he was not entirely comfortable with Humphrey. There was something distant about the man, as though something glassy and brittle stood between him and the outside world. I am a stranger, he finally admitted. I'm trying to leave town, but I seem to be caught in some trouble between the red and white factions. Some red soldiers tried to harm me, though I did nothing to them. And there are other men looking for me as well, people I don't want to meet. So we need to reckon out the best way for him to get out of the squared. Galley finished for him. The squared? Paul was confused, but the bishop seemed to understand. Ah, yes. Well, what sort of moves do you make? He squinted for a moment, then lifted to his eye the monocle, which had been dangling on its ribbon down the expanse of his belly. In the bishop's pudgy fingers it seemed a mere chip of glass. It's hard to tell, since you are an outsider like Galley and his tatterdemalions. You have something of the kern about you, yet something of the horseman as well. You might be another thing entirely, of course, but such speculation as to locomotion would be fruitless for me, like asking a fish whether it would prefer to travel by coach or by velocipede, if you see what I mean. Paul was lost, but he had been warned that the bishop was prone to talk. He put on an attentive look. Bring that over here, boy, the large one. Humphrey gestured. Galley sprang to do his bidding, tottering back with a leather-bound book almost as big as he was. With Paul's help, they opened it across the arms of the bishop's chair. Paul was expecting a map, but to his astonishment, the open pages contained nothing but a grid of alternating colored squares, each one full of strange notations and small diagrams. Now then, let me see. The bishop traced his way across the grid with a broad forefinger. The most obvious course would seem to be for you to hasten here, catty-cornered to us. But then I have always favored bold diagonals, at least since my investiture. However, there have been reports of an unpleasantly savage beast in that vicinity, so perhaps that should not be your primary choice. But you are rather hemmed in at the moment. The Queen has a castle not far from here, and I take it you would prefer not to meet with her minions, He turned a shrewd look on Paul, who shook his head. I thought not. And the lady herself visits this area here with some frequency. She moves very swiftly, so you would do well not to arrange any long journeys through her favorite territory, even should she prove to be temporarily absent. The bishop leaned back, making his sturdy chair squeak. He gestured for Galley to take the boy away, which the boy groaningly did. "I must cogitate," the fat man said, and let suety eyelids descend. He was silent for so long that Paul began to think he might have fallen asleep, and took the opportunity to look around the room. Beside the bishop's large collection of handsomely bound books, there were also all manner of curious things lining the walls, bottles full of dried plants, bones, and even complete skeletons of unfamiliar creatures, bits of twinkling gemstone. All alone on one shelf stood a huge jar containing living insects, some that looked like crusts of bread, others that resembled nothing so much as puddings. As he watched the strange creatures climbing over each other in the stoppered jar, Paul felt a pang of hunger, which was followed a moment later by a surge of nausea. He was hungry, but not that hungry. "While there is a great deal to be said for the order which Her Scarlet Majesty has brought to us during this extended period of check," the bishop said abruptly, making Paul jump, "there is also something to be said for the more laissez-faire attitudes of her predecessor. Therefore, while I have myself excellent relations with our ruler, as I also did with the previous administration, I can understand that you may not be so fortunate." Humphrey stopped and took a deep draught of air as though struck breathless by his own admirable rhetoric. "If you wish to avoid the attentions of our vermilion monarch, I suggest you must take the first alternative I proposed. You can then pass through that square and find yourself directly at the border of our land. The terrible beast said to inhabit the area is doubtless a fantasy of the peasantry, who are famously prone to enliven their dull and rusticated routine with such tales. I will draw you a map. You can be there before sunset. Carpe diem, young man." He spread his hands contentedly on the arms of his wide chair. "Boldness is all." While Galley scurried to find the bishop's pen and paper, Paul seized the chance for information. He had been traveling in fog, figuratively and literally, too much of late. "What is the name of this place?" "Why, it is sometimes referred to as the 8 Squared, at least in the oldest and most learned of tomes, but those of us who have always lived here do not often find cause to refer to it, since we are in the midst of it. Rather like a bird, you see, when asked to define the sky." Paul hurried to ask him another question. "And you were once on good terms with the White King? Queen? None of us have ever met the somnolent seigneurs of our humble territory. They are rather absentee landlords. No, it is the ladies, bless them both, who have traditionally kept the order within the 8 Squared, while their husbands stayed close to home." "Ah, well, if you were on good terms with the White Queen, but the Red Queen now rules the land, how do you manage to be her friend as well?" The bishop looked a trifle annoyed. "Respect, young man. In a single word, that is it. Her Scarlet Majesty relies on my judgment, and I am consulted on things secular as well as superworldly, I might add, and thus I am possessed of a rather unique status." Paul was not satisfied. "But if this Red Queen finds you've helped me, despite the fact that her soldiers might have been looking for me, won't she be annoyed? And if the White Queen ever gains back her power, won't she be furious with you for being so close with her enemy?" Now Humphrey seemed truly put out. His sparse eyebrows moved together and tilted sharply downward over the bridge of his nose. "Young man, It does not become you to speak of things beyond your expertise, whatever may be the current fashion. However, in the interest of beginning an education, which you obviously sorely need, I will explain something. He cleared his throat just as Galley appeared, bearing a plume and a large sheet of foolscap. I found him, Bishop. Yes, that's fine, boy. Now hush. The bishop briefly fixed his small eyes on Paul before allowing them to roam once more. I am a respected man, and I dare not, for the good of the land, throw my not inconsiderable weight behind either one faction or the other. For factions are impermanent, even ephemeral, while the rock upon which my bishopric is founded is made of the stuff of eternity. So, if I may create an analogy, my position is that of someone who sits upon a wall. Such a perch might seem dangerous to one who, without my experience and natural sense of balance, gazes up at me from below. In fact, to such a one, a man such as I might seem in imminent peril of a great downfalling. But the view from up here, from inside here, he tapped his hairless head, is quite different, I assure you. I am, as it were, made in the perfect shape for wall sitting. My master has designed me, as it were, to balance permanently between two unacceptable alternatives. I see, said Paul, who could think of nothing else to say. The bishop appeared to be in a much better mood after explaining. He rapidly sketched a map, which he handed over with a flourish. Paul thanked him, then he and Galley left the tiny castle and thumped back across the drawbridge. "Leave the door open," Bishop Humphrey called after them. "It is too nice a day to miss, and after all, I need fear no one." Looking down as they thumped across the drawbridge, Paul saw that the moat was very shallow. A man could walk across it and barely get his ankles wet. "I told you he'd have the answer you needed," Galley said cheerfully. "Yes," said Paul. "I can see he's the kind of fellow who has answers to things." It took most of the afternoon to walk back. By the time they reached the oyster house, the sun had vanished behind the forest. Paul was looking forward to a chance to sit down and rest his legs. The door swung inward on Galley's first knock. "Curse those Shadow Pt.s," the boy said, "larking about, and they don't remember a thing I've told them. Miyagi! Chesapeake!" There was no answer but echoes. As Paul followed the boy down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps as stark as drumbeats, he felt a tightening around his heart. There was a strange smell in the air, a sea smell, salty and unpleasantly, sweetly sour. The house was very quiet. It was silent in the main room as well, but this time no one was hiding. The children lay scattered across the floor, some struck down and left to lie in strange postures like frozen dancers, others piled carelessly together in the corners, things that had been used and cast away. They had not merely been killed, but violated in some way that Paul could not completely understand. They had been opened up, shucked, and emptied. The sawdust on the floor had clumped in sodden red balls, and still had not sopped up all the red which gleamed, sticky shiny, in the failing light. Galley fell to his knees, moaning, his eyes so wide with horror that Paul feared they might burst from his skull. Paul wanted to pull him away, but found he could not move. Written on the wall, above one of the largest piles, arching above the pale, spattered arms and legs and blind, wide-mouthed faces, smeared across the boards in sloppy scarlet letters, was the word custard. And that's where we're going to quit, because that's the end of the chapter. So I want to say quickly, I didn't say hello to everybody, so I'm going to say quickly to those who checked in. Anitra, hello, thank you for joining me. James, good to see you too. Eric, a pleasure, a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. And oh my gosh, this has cut off all the people in the first top. Kristen, hello. And oh God, it's chopped off. Carl, there's Carl. Hello, Carl. And who else? Oh my God, this has done that again, hasn't it? Hello, Jeremy. Yes, thank you. I did enjoy doing the Bishop Humphrey bit. That was great fun. Who else is on here? Mostly these are folks who looks like came in slightly late and are chatting. Let me see if I missed who else I missed. No, God, the comments. Please, Lordy, just explain to me what you're doing. God, the comments have thwarted me again. It's only given me the last few minutes of comments. Oh well. The rest of you, I know you were there. I'll figure them out and see them later, and I will say a mental thank you and hello to you. Until then, that's all I can do. I'm sorry. It's very confusing, the Facebook comment thing, which is one of the reasons that I'm going to have to think of some other way to do this. But let me thank you anyway for joining me. It was great fun having that part to read tonight, as creepy as it is, because it was fun to write. And I will be back next week. Also, same time as before, 1 a.m. Sunday morning, and then 7 p.m. Sunday night. We will be continuing with the next chapter. Chapter 13, Elan's Daughter's Son, which is where you learn a bit about Kabu's background, where we learn a bit about Kabu's background. Until then, I thank you so much for joining me. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of the people around you. Take good care of anybody that you can help at a time when a lot of people need help. And I will see you very soon, as always. It's great fun to share this with you. And you have a good week until I see you again.